or something happens, you need to talk about it, right? When do you talk about it? And this is where, okay, she said something, it doesn't quite fit your boundaries. You're not, you know what I mean? It's not good, but then it goes away, or something happens, you need to talk about it, right? When do you talk about it? You know what I mean? And when do you bring it up? Let's say she wants to talk about something and it's going to be a friction point. All right. So you want to time it. All right. So you time it to when there's a time where you two have a positive bias. Okay. And so mentally speaking, people can get in a negative bias or a positive bias or a neutral bias. You want to be as neutral in your biases as you can in these types of situations, but you can have a bit of it's useful to have a bit of a positive feelings or bias towards your partner, right? If your partner has demonstrated, for example, that she's a good partner up until this point, you can go on that assumption unless she's demonstrating something different. And so, for example, let's say she crosses a boundary or he does something that says something or does something you don't like. You can go in with the assumption that this person is, not intending to harm you with what they did. Otherwise, why would you be with them? You know what I mean? If that's how, if you assume that the worst of your partner and your partner's a bad partner, then you probably shouldn't be in any commitment with this person. So let's not assume the worst, but let's assume a little bit of a positive bias here. Not unreasonably positive, but, at least be neutral. If you're thinking all the negative thoughts, it's probably coming from your anxiety, right? And at least look things neutrally first before you make a judgment. But even if you're with her and she has demonstrated a lot of good qualities and this thing seems uncharacteristic, give her the benefit of the doubt. You as a man too, like you want the benefit of the doubt, right? If you do something and she's triggered by it, do you want her to assume the worst all the time? I won't have a partner who assumes the worst all the time about me. You know what I mean? You want them to have some level of a positive bias towards you, unless of course you've earned the negative bias. Like if you lied to her a whole lot and you've not recovered from that or demonstrated honesty in other situations, well, it's going to take a while to build up trust, right? If she's lied to you or she's done boundary crossings in the same way, it makes sense then that you would have a negative assumption that this conversation's not going to go well, or that she intended you, whatever, that all the bad things she's done in the past, she's doing again. It's normal to have that negative assumption, right? However, you cannot have a productive conversation or deal with this friction point if you are in a negative bias. All right. Not really. And so you have to move that. If you want to continue to have negative exchanges until the relationship eventually ends, then go by all means. Okay. By all means. But if you don't want to do that, you have to, okay, she's done a bunch of things in the past. This looks like that thing. I'm going to at least approach the conversation, give them the benefit of the doubt, gather all of the information, and figure out where we're at before I assume that they did all this, right? Or whatever. We're not talking about like hard proof of, of making a, mistake or doing something wrong, but we're talking just like in a conflict, right? And so you want to move yourself to neutral if you're in negative, and having a positive bias, a little bit of a positive one for your partner until they destroy that or ruin that, in which case you probably need to exit the relationship. If you don't have a positive bias and you're not willing to have a positive bias towards your partner, then you probably don't need to be with that person. You know what I mean? But if you're not willing to do that, and a lot of you guys are not, men and women aren't willing to do that because they're insecure about, being duped or whatever, right? It just, you're afraid. And so fear is going to crush your relationships and anxiety will crush it. You want to pick a time when a positive bias exists, right? Or at least a neutral, a positive. So when something happens, and if it's a moment or when she's in a bad mood or when things are like heated, let's say she's just let's say she's not happy that day because it's just whatever reason. That's not the time now to bring up, right? Or when you're irritated with her, let's say you're irritated with her about something unrelated, something else. That's not the time, or just a general irritation. Let's say you're both in just a shitty mood, right? She's in a bad mood, it's put you in a bad mood, and then you're thinking of that thing that you need to talk about with her. Now is not the time. Oh, well, like she says something, it's bothered, it's just her mood or is bothering you, and you go, well, how about 2 days ago? And then you bring up whatever it is, right? Wrong time. Okay, bad timing. So a lot of times what happens is you guys are afraid to bring up friction points when things are going well, because you're afraid that it'll ruin the climate that you're in. And then you'll wait until things are just not feeling quite as good for her or for you. And then that's when you choose to bring it up. The wrong answer. Okay. That's the wrong and the opposite way of how you have to handle it. Because if you bring things up and you're in a negative bias and she is in a negative bias, you're both going to think the worst out of each other and what you guys are saying. And your perceptions and the way you take what they're saying isn't going to go well. And it's going to escalate into more of a conflict. You're going to make a problem bigger because of a negative bias versus solve a problem and make the effects of those problems smaller.